Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. So here we are again, and this is part 2 of our story. So if you haven't heard part 1, please go back to the description because you don't want to miss out on it. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with tonight's story. Ava MacDougall's account. I'm the oldest daughter in the MacDougall family. I'm 16 years old. I've been told I bear a striking resemblance to the fictional character of Mary Poppins. I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or not. But then I am told she was a vibrant personality. I'm much the same, as nothing ever gets me down. I have an upbeat attitude. I will confess I smelt trouble brewing the moment the mollycoddled nanny Georgina Fletcher arrived on the doorstep of our lives, like a gale-force southerly wind that didn't cut much slack. She was a precocious spoilt brat, with a face seared by a scowl so deep it was almost humourful, but very incongruous to a cherub-like angelic face that she possessed, framed by a buoyant curtain of blonde wispy curls that bounced with a frenzied fury whenever she moved. It was incredulous that such a peaked face was dappled by 2 of the cutest dimples that I've ever seen, with bejewelled lapis lazuli eyes that twinkled brightly with a pugnacious indignance. I was soon to learn, when that little girl did manage a smile, she could quite literally light up a room like the sunshine. But smiles from this capricious little Georgina were few and far between. I could see this girl was as temperamental as the weather, who could blow hot and cold at a moment's notice, and that with her living under our roof, there were going to be some stormy days ahead of us. Georgina began to have a dramatic tantrum when her mother kissed her goodbye on the cheeks and returned to the taxi. She was bawling her eyes out, howling, stamping her feet belligerently on the wooden oakwood floors of our farmhouse that echoed under her indignant wrath. I knew this young, pampered, overindulged child was going to require work, and lots of it. I was so eager to fix her. I think every member of my household, most especially my parents, desperately wanted to help tame this obstreperous, unruly wild child that was like a delinquent feral cat, with claws so sharp they could scratch you viciously if you weren't very careful, and a tongue as spiky as a hedge of briars or a cantankerous hedge of thistles. My mother had welcomed Georgina warmly, given her a hug, but the affronted, incorrigible child had wilfully pushed her away so that she almost fell over on her feet, as if the physical affection was somewhat uncomfortable for her. No sooner had Georgina settled in, she became provocatively insolent, rude, discourteous, especially at family meal times, where we sat around the long wooden table in our rustic kitchen, where we were passing around serving dishes of roast potatoes, cauliflower cheese, roast chicken and gravy. Georgina glances down at her plate disapprovingly, with an expression of abject horror on her face, as if the delicious home-cooked food plated before her, prepared so lovingly by my domesticated mother, is absolutely revolting, and does not meet with the exacting standards found on a menu of takeaways. I want pizza! I don't want this! I don't like this! I want pizza! Order me pizza now! This food is yucky! I don't like yucky food! I can't eat this! I can't eat this! She says, thumping her knife and fork on the table like an uncongenial drum roll, as she pushes her plate away objectionably. Why can't you eat this, dear? My mother asks her. I'll have you know, it's absolutely delicious. I prepared it for everyone this evening for dinner. The roast chicken is tender and succulent, the potatoes crisp. I get them like this because I cook them in goose fat. They're better than fried chips, I can promise you that. It's delicious, Mum, we all chorus together. But I want pizza. I don't want this, says Georgina. I want pizza. I don't want this. At home my mother always lets me have whatever I want. I don't like this food. My mum's nice. She's not like you. We all eat the same food in our household, Georgina. pipes my mother. "We don't stand on ceremony here. We don't go ordering people takeaways. There's no special treatment in our house, Georgina." "I want pizza! I want pizza!" says Georgina, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. To our horror, she reaches out to the potatoes and chicken on her plate and revengefully squishes them together in her hands like Play-Doh and throws a congealed mush directly at my mother that misses her by a hair's breadth. Peggy enthusiastically dashes over with delight as the globules of mush have exploded everywhere. The kitchen is beginning to look like a Jackson Pollock painting. Well, the floor anyway. Peggy, realising that chicken is raining from heaven quite literally, hardly daring to believe her good fortune, charges over eagerly to the carnage, hoovering everything up, licking the floor clean so it shines under the aftermath of her fastidious pink tongue. A silence ensues around the table as Georgina continues to squish the food on her plate and throwing it across the kitchen like darts against a dartboard, where it meets an eager reception from good old Peggy, who never lets us down. Both my parents never react. They don't react at all. They ignore Georgina. They know she's seeking attention. All you can hear is the sounds of our knives and forks clinking against the china as we eat in silence while knocking back glasses of homemade lemonade. Georgina's face has grown her fuchsia colour. She is puffed up with indignation, as if she wants to explode in a rage. She's a self-entitled little madam, very frustrated not to get her way. It's clear that to calm the turbulent storms back home in Philly, Georgina's parents have never dared say no to this child, but have wrapped her in cotton wool. Peggy, on seeing food flung across the floor, realises it's come from our new guest. So she parks herself against Georgina's feet like a comfortable footrest, deciding this might be a good idea, as this human food machine that tosses food over the floor is now her new best friend. "I'm hungry," says Georgina, as me and my brother remove the dishes from the table and quickly stack them in the dishwasher. "I'm sorry, dear," says my mother. "If you didn't want to eat your dinner, then of course you're going to be hungry, aren't you? But that's not my problem, is it?" Georgina looks very upset. Her eyes brighten when my mother brings a huge bowl of chocolate pudding to the table. My mother sits at the head of the table, asking everybody how much pudding they each want. She ladles it generously into pudding bowls. "Normal size," says all the kids. "Not too much for me, I say." My mother doesn't ask Georgina how much chocolate pudding she will be wanting. We know she's not getting any, as she refused to eat her dinner. But Georgina does not know this. "I want lots and lots of chocolate pudding," she announces. But the bowls are only parked in front of all 10 members of my family, my 5 brothers, 3 sisters, my mum and dad. Georgina is looking at my mother with an open mouth that is so wide it could almost catch mosquitoes. "Where's my chocolate pudding? Where's mine?" she cries out. "Where do you know? What's going on? Why is there no pudding for me?" "Oh, didn't you know, dear?" said my mother calmly. "You don't get pudding if you don't eat your dinner." "But I want pudding," says Georgina, thumping the table angrily with her spoon. "I want pudding! I want pudding!" My 8-year-old brother Donovan turns around and pipes, "Well, you should have eaten your food, silly. Then you could have had some pudding, but you're not getting any now." At this, Georgina grabs Donovan's bowl of chocolate pudding, snatching it away from him fiercely, gobbling it up as quickly as she can before anyone can do anything to stop her. She licks the bowl clean with her tongue and stares at our shocked family in glee, as if to say, "I'm the one that got the last laugh here." "That's my pudding," says Donovan. "Give it back." But of course it was too late. Georgina had eaten it so fast there was no stopping her. As the days passed, little Georgina became more and more obnoxious, complaining bitterly that she wanted to go home, that she loathed our farm. She hated my mother and dad and my siblings. Georgina was forever pulling Donovan's hair, throwing toys at him, threatening to leave our home at every opportunity. "I'm going to leave this horrible place. I'm going back to Philly," she tells us over dinner every night. "I'm going to walk home." "Sweetheart," says my mother, "it's 12 hours in the car getting back to your home in Philly. It'll take you a long time to get home. You're stuck with us, I'm afraid. But look on the bright side, Georgina. You've only got 7 more weeks left with us, and then you can go home. You mean we have to have Georgina living with us for another 7 weeks? Says Donovan, looking appalled. She keeps pulling my hair, Mum, trampling my toys. She's broken so many of them. Is this true, Georgina? Have you been trampling Donovan's toys? He's lying. He's always lying, spouts Georgina, sticking out her tongue at Donovan. He just wants me to get into trouble. That's his problem. He's not a nice person. Georgina's account. Over the years, I've spoken to many people who have absolutely no memory, or very little that is, of being 8 years old. They might occasionally get a fleeting recollection of the school they attended, but most of their recall over that period of time is almost lost upon them, as it happened a long time ago, but not for me. Well, to be fair, most of my youth is indeterminate, rather obscure, hazy and vague, but not this time of my life, that's for sure. I remember going to stay at the McDougalls as if it were yesterday, with a crystal clear clarity. I don't recall a time in my life I felt more angry, insulted and offended. I can remember everything about the home, from the exquisite views of the countryside to the smell of leather and tack in the house, along with lavender-scented furniture polish, homemade bread, cinnamon buns and freshly baked cakes. I was enraged to have been dumped on a family that I didn't even know from a bar of soap. How could my parents betray me like this? Abandon me to live with 10 strangers who lived out in the sticks, were homeschooled under the strict supervision of their mother, whom had been a junior high school teacher at one point in her life. I sneakily suspected that she was not going to be a piece of candy to get my sticky fingers around. In my limited experiences, teachers were all the same, formidable, bossy, dictatorial. My parents had sent me here due to an overreaction on their parts, provoked by the nudge of a very well-meaning headmistress, Mrs. Bell Schreiner, who had taken a very dim view of my behaviour. I had been summoned to her offices on numerous occasions, accused of pulling people's hair, calling a girl in the school playground railway tracks due to the braces she wore on her teeth that I'm sorry looked like railway tracks. I also told the boy in my class that if Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer could see what a nerd he was, they'd tie him up in the forest and leave him there for the wolves to eat. This didn't go down well with him, and the tattletale, of course, went howling over to the teachers, told them I'd said I was going to tie him up in the forest so the wolves would eat him up. It's amazing how things can so easily be taken out of context. Needless to say, the chagrined headmistress had rapped her fists on the table, actually shouted at me. My dear girl, I will not abide bullying in my school. Do you understand that? I had humoured her with a cursory nod and a polite, Yes, Mrs. Schreiner. If there are any more shenanigans from you, Miss Georgina, I will be forced to call your parents. Of course, I thought she was pulling my leg. She was never going to call my parents. But she did. When our teacher, Mrs. Huggett at school, was oohing and aahing over Marjorie Cunningham's painting in front of the class, as if it was a wonderful, exemplary piece of art. It wasn't even that good a picture. I knew our teacher favoured Marjorie. She always had, and she always would. She looked at my painting with such a scant disregard. So to extract my revenge, I drew over Marjorie's painting, which was the nail in the coffin for me. I was immediately ushered to Mrs. Schreiner's office to explain myself. Why? Why on earth would you draw over Marjorie's painting? She asked me, with an infuriated tone of voice. 'Cause the teacher likes her best, I explained. My comments went down with Mrs. Schreiner like a lead balloon. The next thing I know, my mother is wheedled in by the headmistress to hear about my abysmal conduct and shameful behaviour. My mother told me that she loved me, but she didn't like what I was becoming, a spoilt, selfish little brat. She blamed herself for my behaviour. She hadn't spent enough time with me and had given in to my every whim instead of laying down boundaries for me. She assures me that things are going to change very soon around here, as she's handing over the reins of her business to a lady she recently recruited. So the good news is, sweetheart, when you return from the McDougalls, I'll be able to spend a lot more time with you, she announces proudly. My mother and father had told me I was staying at the McDougalls to learn some manners. In truth, I was angry with everyone. Angry with the headmistress of my school, angry with my parents, angry with the McDougalls. It was like they were in conspiracy against me. I didn't want to be here. Most of all, I couldn't stand goody little two-shoes Donovan, who was my age, was always winding me up by being so perfectly well behaved, always sucking up to his mum and dad, doing whatever he was told. He made his bed religiously every morning, polished his shoes, helped his mum in laying the table at night. I would pull his hair, break some of his toys to get my revenge. It felt good to see him become aggrieved. His face would grow ashen as he picked up the broken toy. With a sombre expression, he would say, "Why would you be so mean? Why are you always so mean? What is wrong with you?" He said this incredulously, as if my behaviour was impossible to comprehend. It gave me a sense of macabre satisfaction to ruffle his feathers. I thoroughly enjoyed irking him. But I will say this, he was no crybaby, nor did he sulk or brood or even tell on me, like other kids normally did. I suppose it gave me a sense of power to get out some of my grievances on him. In a home where I'd become powerless, as I couldn't manipulate the people in this household like I had done so successfully at home with my mother and dad. The McDougalls were not pliable like my own parents. They were resolutely set in their ways in regard to how they raised their children. Suffice to say, Donovan told me that I wasn't a nice girl, that girls were supposed to be made of sugar and spice, everything that's nice. But I was made of snips and snails and puppy dogs' tails, and was the nastiest girl in the entire world, and he couldn't wait for me to go back home, and the sooner the better. And he hoped after that he'd never ever get to see me again as long as he lived. "I'm going home," I told him, "sooner than you know. Even if I have to walk there, I'm going." "You'll never do it," he said. "It's too far." It must have been about 12 o'clock at night when I climbed cautiously out of bed, on a night after having braved a whole week of living under the McDougal's roof, and I couldn't take it a moment longer. I had to leave this god-awful place full of horrible rules. I wanted to return back home to Philly. I shared a bedroom with the McDougal's 8-year-old daughter, Sally, whom had avoided me rather like the plague since I arrived. Donovan told me she was scared of me. "No one likes you," he said spitefully. "No one likes slits and snails or puppy dogs' tails, and that's what you are, Georgina. You're not even a girl." Thankfully, Sally was fast asleep and didn't hear me tiptoeing around. I found a small carrier plastic bag to fling in a few of my clothes, along with a torch in the downstairs pantry. I was small and slight, so I easily squeezed and wiggled my body through the downstairs window. Peggy the dog was barking furiously, wagging her tail profusely. That dog was the only member of the McDougal's household that actually liked me. I had seen the clandestine stolen glances over the dinner table over the last few days, as the family acted so appalled simply because I didn't want a roast dinner. I liked fish fingers and chips, pizza, burger, spaghetti bolognese, Chinese takeaways, but I didn't like the McDougal's homemade food. Well, not at first, but a few days in, I had secretly changed my mind, secretly deciding that the food wasn't half so bad. One thing, though, that hadn't changed was I desperately wanted to go home, and if I had to walk back home to Philly, then so be it. In my childlike, illogical, irrational reasoning, I really thought that finding my way home would be pretty straightforward. I mean, how hard could it actually be? I could walk through the woodgrove, follow the trees, and was sure I'd find my way back to Philly. Donovan had told me there was a road beyond the woodgrove, a shortcut that he said led to the main highway. I was now outside the window of the downstairs living room, wearing my jeans and a sweatshirt. A cold wind punnelled against my body, its nipping bites nudging my skin like a ghostly breath. For a fleeting second, I had faint misgivings. I was seized with a slight reservation about this journey, but for some reason I knew I'd find my way back home, much like my uncle's homing pigeons. He always told me that their inner compass mechanisms enable them to find their way back, so why should it be any different for me? As incongruous and implausible as it may sound to the cynical of heart and the doubting of mind, I could taste, feel and smell that night all those years ago as an 8-year-old girl, almost as if it happened just yesterday. It was a dark, intimidating night, but I didn't care. I was supercharged with a resolute, dogged determination to get out of here. Stuff the MacDougalls and all their stupid, pathetic rules. Stuff Donovan and his mean snipes. Stuff the oldest daughter, Ava MacDougal, who was always bossing me around, putting me firmly in my place. She rather reminded me of a black raven, sitting there on a picket fence, staring at you through dark eyes. I never knew what she was thinking, but I knew she thought I needed fixing up, and believed she was the one to do it, to nip me into shape so that I would return home to Philly, the perfect loving daughter that everyone wanted me to become. Good luck to her. My all-pervading desire to leave the farmhouse was unquenchable. Of course I was afraid of the dark, but I refused to be discouraged. My haughty pride propelled me ever forward on my intrepid adventure. I would be like my all-time favourite fictional hero, Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. Stories my father read me regularly over the weekends. I loved those boys. I knew the valiant, daredevil, audacious boys like Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer would never be afraid or intimidated by the dark. They would think you were a complete wuss or a silly little crybaby if you cowered over a wee bit of twilight. I was tough, plucky and daredevil, as they were, as good as any boy, braver than most. If I left the MacDougalls' property during the day, someone would likely call a halt to my plans. That couldn't happen. The rules would put me in my place. Stupid rules like never being allowed pudding unless I ate my vegetables. I mean, how pathetic is that? Back at home in Philly, I could have whatever I wanted. My parents never said no to me. I had power over them that I lacked here in the MacDougall household. Mr. and Mrs. MacDougall were stiff, hard and unyielding, like a redwood tree. They couldn't be bribed, manipulated or persuaded to change their minds about anything. Mr. and Mrs. MacDougall never raised their voices to me, but they willfully ignored me when my behaviour displeased them, and that would make me as mad as hell. It infuriated me. I hated being disregarded with such a passion. They refused to listen to me when I had a hissy fit, and always made me apologise to Donovan for pulling his hair, or smashing or breaking up his toys. I hated apologising to Donovan. He had that smug, self-satisfied look on his face when I said, "I'm sorry, Donovan. Sorry for pulling your hair. I'm sorry for smashing your toy truck." I knew if I didn't apologise, I would be excluded from dinner, and that couldn't happen. In the beginning, I absolutely loathed the meals, but begrudgingly I ate them. There was nothing else to eat, and I was always starving hungry. Something about the fresh air and the outside exercise here in Jasper increased my appetite significantly, inviting unwelcome hunger pangs to entertain me every mealtime. Of course, I pretended to hate the food. I'd fiddle around with my knife and fork, act like I was absolutely loathing every mouthful, but I began to enjoy it. I'd never give Mrs. MacDougall the gleeful satisfaction or good pleasure of knowing that, of course. I wanted her to falsely believe that it was torturous to eat her food, so I would deliberately pull faces as I ate, as if every mouthful that I consumed that travelled down my gut was too dreadful for words. She would watch me as I ate, and I could see it upset her that I seemed to loathe her cooking. I could be quite the actress when the need arose, but it was a bit unfortunate that I couldn't have seconds. If I dared ask for more, it would mean I approved of Mrs. MacDougall's food, and I didn't want to indulge her with any credit. I wanted her to know that I hated every single minute I spent in her house, eating her food, living with her goody two-shoes pathetic family. It is curiously amazing how your pertinacious, uncompromising determination can almost certainly help you plough through adversity, like an obstinate bulldozer on a landfill site. I didn't care how dark this forest was, and when I did care, I fiercely reprimanded myself, reminding myself stubbornly of Huck Finn's unfaltering stoicism. I could hear him saying to me in my head, "I told you, Georgina, you're a silly little girl. I knew you couldn't do it." I would grimace. My tenacious, indomitable resolve would propel my lumbering feet ever forward through the woods, while flickering pictures of my home back in Philly would teasingly flash into my mind, reminding me of why I was running away in the first place from the MacDougalls. My feet trundled cumbrously across the ground, snapping leaf litter and broken branches. I'd been carrying some clothes in a plastic carrier bag, but the bag had snapped and broken. My clothes had spilled out of the hole inside, and they dropped precariously around the forest. I couldn't go back to recover them all, as I'd been zigzagging through the forest anyway, and they could be absolutely anywhere. Besides, I'd given up actually caring about such mundane, inefficacious practicalities. I had an entire wardrobe of clothes back home at Philly. Losing a few would hardly be a train smash. The trees in the woodgrove were swinging in the darkness, their leafy boughs jiggling backwards and forwards. It was a menacing, bodeful wind that seemed to whistle through the trees, as if the whole forest was wailing. It was a ghostly, disquieting sound, which was rather unnerving, but I knew it was only the wind. It wasn't as dark as it could have been, as soft shafts of moonlight hungrily penetrated the branches, puddling the floor generously in an ethereal light. Sometimes I heard the hoot of an owl, the whisking flap of wings flying above my head, the strange howls in the distance that may have come from coyotes or wolverines. I wasn't actually sure. After a while I became fatigued, rather tired. I had no idea how long I'd been walking for, but it felt like forever, and I still hadn't reached that road. My body was aching all over. I was out of breath, and tiredness seized my body like a commanding foe, so that my body easily buckled beneath me, rather like a folding camping chair. I surrendered to its powerful persuasive influences. I sat under a tree for a moment, just for a brief respite, well, so I thought. I drifted off into a deep sleep, but I suddenly awoke with a start. At first I couldn't comprehend where I was. I felt somewhat disorientated, rather confused, and that was when I remembered what I was doing here. Of course, I was trying to escape from the MacDougalls, to find the road that would lead me safely back home to Philly. I was in the woodgrove. I'm sure I must have slept for a couple of hours, possibly more, and it was rather a long break. I could hear a rustling sound and see figures low on the ground, crawling along, resembling dogs, stealthily moving ever forwards towards me, through the ground cover, and then I see a dozen pairs of yellow eyes peering at me curiously through the trees. Then they move purposely closer and closer and closer. In that moment I am seized with an alarming terror, a great trepidation, as one by one these intransigent creatures circle around me. I know they're coyotes. They hem me in from every side, one mulishly braver and spunkier than the others, who's only a hair's breadth away from me, his lips folded back to expose canine teeth. I think he was about to yank his sharp teeth in my flesh to start the frenzied attack. I quickly switch on my torch to shine it directly in the creature's eyes, which seemed to distract them all for a while, as they stepped backwards warily, a brief reluctance hovering over them. But then when they got used to the light and sensed my vulnerability, they were game for an easy meal, and I was that easy meal. The cocky coyote moved ever closer to me once again, more determined than ever to take a large chunk out of me. They would bide their time if need be. These creatures have patience. They're clever. I oscillate my arms frantically. "Stop that! Go away! Stop that!" I kept saying. I was kicking the ground with my boots, thrashing around, trying to make noises to put them off, but it wasn't working. These tenacious coyotes were not easily put off and seemed fully aware of the games I was playing. They weren't fooled. By all accounts, they knew I'd be light work to take down, very easy. In no time at all, they'd be feasting on me. It's like I'd been presented before them on a dinner platter as very easy pickings. I knew that I was powerless against these creatures. Right now, I would have given anything to be sleeping safely under the MacDougal's roof. Suddenly, they didn't seem half so bad at all. Even Donovan seemed more likeable compared to the predatory faces I was seeing now, that are drooling for my blood. My eyes fill with tears. I feel helpless. In a trice, one coyote has thrown me to the ground. I don't recall how it happened, but he is joined by a couple of his dogged friends, who are now crawling over me. I remember knowing that it was all over for me. I did let out a choking scream that was subdued by a cocktail of fearful emotions. I'm waiting for the teeth to be tearing into my flesh. I know I'm going to have to prepare for a very painful death. All of a sudden I hear a huge scream, unlike anything I've ever heard in my life or since, along with the sound of ponderous feet pounding the ground as they thunder towards me. Some coyotes scatter, while keeping their nervous yellow eyes focused on me, as if watching what is about to unfold. The one that had thrown me to the ground, and was about to thrust its jagged teeth into my skin, is suddenly thrown backwards, with a forceful thrust by a very powerful pair of arms. I hear painful whimpers and yelps, as 3 coyotes hit the ground very hard. But somehow the injured parties manage to rise to their feet. They skulk away into the night, followed by the rest of the coyotes that shoot away as fast as rockets. For whatever has come to my aid has terrified the life out of them. The desire to mess with me has now been eclipsed. The coyotes disappear into the woods, their hearts set now on easier pickings. In that moment, I see her. My torch has fallen out of my hands, but its light, accompanied by the shafts of moonlight, enable me to see her very clearly. She's standing only feet away from me, with a bewildered, confounded, nonplussed expression on her face. I know what she's thinking. What are you doing here? I'm so stunned by this creature. She's built like a giant army tank, easily 7 to 8 foot tall, possibly 700 pounds or more. I'm only 8, but I know this creature is a Bigfoot. I'd seen programs about them before on television, but I thought they were supposed to be vindictively mean, hostile, aggressive. But this creature, she's as gentle as a doe. I know instinctively I'm safe with her. I also know she's going to take care of me. She's very different to the footage I've seen before of other Bigfoots. In my opinion, she's much more human. Her face is feminine, her body Herculean. It's like you could easily put 5 strong men inside her body to make her up. She's as sturdy as a rock, as hardy as a redwood tree, as powerful as a rhino, but so gentle. She's covered in long, dark, flowing hair that sways like the grass moving in the wind. But there's a white patch of hair on her rather like a sheepdog that runs in a vertical, jagged line down her chest, on either side of her small, pert breasts. The creature bends down, encourages me to climb on her shoulders. I don't hesitate. Then I ride on her back. She takes me to a farmer's barn. The place is not familiar to me, but I feel secure being under a roof, hemmed in by bricks and mortar, and not in the woodgrove. The Bigfoot prepares a sleeping spot for me, over some hay that she lays down on the ground. She lies down beside me, like a mother dog watching over her puppies. In the first light of the new morning, she nudges me wide awake, throws me again over her shoulders. This time I'm enjoying the ride, as she glides in the early morning, back through the woodgrove, where she found me first, and then we both sit down behind a tree together, and I have the sense she wants me to stay put, as if she's waiting for someone, as if she's expecting something. Ava MacDougall. I am awoken in the morning with a sense that something's not right. I was 16 years old at the time, but instinctive possibly because I'd learnt to keep a beady eye on all my brothers and sisters, all my life. It's something I always did naturally. I'm very much like my mother. I have a nurturing side to my personality, and a mother's sense of knowing when something feels strangely off. I climb out of bed and dive into my jeans and a long-sleeved sweatshirt. I race up the sweeping staircase to check my brothers and sisters' bedrooms, silently slipping into each bedroom, rather like a ghost in the night, to be greeted by their soft snores. I breathe a sigh of relief as I see the familiar faces of my beloved siblings denting the pillows with their sleepy heads. The first light of the new morning has sprinkled its reflective illuminations through the clouds, but the sun hasn't asserted its authority yet, nor has it pushed its way assiduously through the sky to dominate the day. Well, not yet. So the early light is subdued. It is when I enter the room where Georgina is supposed to be sleeping opposite my sister Sally that I notice that her bed is rumpled, as if it has been slept in, but it's cold as ice, as if she hasn't been in bed for a long while. Georgina's pyjamas and slippers are flung haphazardly over the floor, in a heaped mess. Was she already up? I wondered. It was so early. What could she possibly be doing right now? I did think that was unusual. Georgina was always the last one to get up out of bed, which she did with a measure of reluctance. A chill runs down my spine. Our family was responsible for taking care of this girl. as obnoxious and untamed as she may be. But despite her wildness, I did have a creeping affection for her. She was growing on me. She was a little feral and difficult, but underneath all the layers, there was a loving child longing to emerge like a butterfly from its cocoon. I had come to the conclusion that her unruly, rude behaviour that she exhibited was attention-seeking. Her parents had clearly not devoted enough time and energy for raising her. There was a large part of me that realised that she was a victim of her own upbringing. I think her parents spoiled her rotten, to make themselves feel better about their otherwise preoccupied, busy lives, which is understandable. As I'm standing there in this room, my sister Sally is lying fast asleep, her blonde hair strewn over the pillow like a mermaid, her eyes tightly shut. I'm haunted over Georgina's idle threats, of which none of us in my family had taken seriously, not even for a moment. But supposing her threats had not been so idle after all. Supposing she had meant every word of what she'd said. Let's not kid, Georgina was a willful, sedulous and spunky child. If any kid was capable of running away, it would almost certainly be Georgina. She was different to other kids. "I'm going to go home," she kept saying. "I'll walk there if I have to. I'm not going to stay here. I hate this place." She had stamped her feet indignantly, thundered off like an angry black cloud in the sky. Of course, we willfully ignored her. I mean, surely an 8-year-old kid, even one as feisty and truculent as Georgina, would not be brave enough to run away. I'd never met an 8-year-old kid that could be that ballsy, but there are always exceptions to that rule. Georgina was one of those exceptions. Even at 8 years old, I had never encountered anyone like her. She didn't seem to be afraid of things that other girls her age were. She was precociously bright for one so young. She'd prattle on about the adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Characters well above her age, I would imagine. She would say that she was just like them, an indomitable, brave warrior, an intrepid adventurer. At the time I'd been rather charmed by these endearing tales, but now it was all coming back to haunt me. Had Georgina run away? No, surely not. No. I can feel my breath rising up through my chest in a heated, inflamed panic. A dread sweeps over my body, while I taste nausea rising up in the back of my throat. I don't have a good feeling about this, but I daren't wake my parents up. They'd be so grievously upset if something had happened to Georgina. I must find her quickly. I dart around our farm, with our black dog Peggy running behind me, thinking that my fast pace is indicative of a big, wonderful game. She's infected by my hyped, frantic energy. Lets out some excited woofs while thumping her tail. I search barns, outbuildings. I run across the field of watermelons, but she's nowhere to be seen. And that's when I see one of Georgina's dresses lying outside the woodgrove. My heart begins to do a flip-flop. It frenziedly attacks my insides. When you're missing an 8-year-old child, you see a dress of hers lying on the ground. I won't tell you about the spinning thoughts that go roller-coasting through your mind, tearing away at your guts, wounding your soul with heaped spoonfuls of trepidation. My biggest fear that drives through my mind, like a rocket launching itself through the clouds, is that Georgina might have been killed, harmed by a wild animal. I dash frantically through the woodgrove, clouded by an overcast mood. The shimmering light of an early sun trickles through the trees. The sound of the pretty bird song, the trills, warbles and tweets of birds, is poignantly vibrant this morning. The spectacular viridescence of this majestic forest, with its lacy ferns, leafy green ground covers, moss-lined tree trunks, is arrestingly transfixing. But this morning I'm immune to the beauty of this place, if that's at all possible, and the pearly droplets of dew that cling to the leaves of the plants. All I want to do is find Georgina, right now. I feel vacuously empty inside. I discover a trail of Georgina's clothes strewn across the earthen floor of the woods. I realise with relief that she must have been carrying a plastic bag. I discover the plastic bag on the ground. It has a hole on it. That gives me a measure of reassurance. I cry out for Georgina. Georgina! 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 Where are you, Georgina? But Peggy is barking excitedly at something. She's wagging her tail, as if greeting a good friend. That's when I see Georgina. She's standing there, holding the hand of a large female Bigfoot. I am so bewildered, so shocked, that I actually faint. I fall backwards on the ground. This has never happened to me before or since. But I awaken to find this female Bigfoot helping me up onto my feet, looking into my eyes with concern. "Are you all right?" are the words that flood through my mind. Don't be shocked. I am real. Once I've risen to my feet, stumbling under my knees awkwardly, that feel as if they're going to give away from the shock, little Georgina throws herself happily into my arms. She cries. We both hug. The Bigfoot looks incredibly pleased that we have been reunited. It's almost like she was expecting me to come and pick Georgina up. She gives both me and Georgina a friendly tap on the back, then glides away, giving me a brief nod, and then she's gone. For a while I stand there, my tongue almost choked from astonishment, while Georgina tells me that she came so close to being killed by coyotes, but the Bigfoot female had saved her life. "Please don't tell your parents I tried to run away," she begs me. "I won't say anything," I said, "but you mustn't tell them about the Bigfoot we saw." From that day onwards, something shifted within Georgina. She changed from an obnoxious little brat into a delightful child that was fun to have around. Even her own parents assured my family that we had performed miracles on their girl, and the headmistress, Mrs. Schreiner, actually phoned us directly from the school to praise us for Georgina's miraculous transformations. But methinks the credit has a lot to do with a female Bigfoot, as after that night that she ran away, she changed so positively. But coming close to dying makes most people reevaluate their lives, possibly even an 8-year-old girl. 16 years later, Georgina's account. I'm walking past the Bucks County Courthouse here in Philadelphia. I'm strolling around the vertical layout here that crisscrosses several diagonal roads and V-shaped corners that represent West State, West Court and Clinton, Court and Main, and State and Main. There are a plethora of visitors clad in summer clothes here, casually strolling down the sidewalks, lined with brick pavers. Wild trees ablaze with leafy green foliage pencil up through the ground like verdant umbrellas, dappling the landscape prettily in an arresting viridescence that complements the fabulous brickwork of the buildings here. They're Victorian street lamps, large hanging baskets where red geraniums tumble over the sides of planters, in effusive large colourful blossoms. I love walking in this area, peppered with a rich, vibrant history, which is clearly seen in the amazing architecture of the buildings. I'm glad I'm wearing flat shoes today, along with a cool summer's dress. I can tell that it's going to be a scintillating hot day. The sunshine is quite bright this morning, but the mood of this place is ebullient. I think possibly because it's one of the first real days of summer, after a cold winter long behind us. The weather creates that Mediterranean holiday atmosphere that is very infectious. I'm holding a long leather briefcase in my hand, the type an artist might carry for a portfolio. I'm working for my mother's interior design company as a key designer. I'm meeting up with clients to discuss the layout of a new kitchen. The woman's name is Nora Maxwell. She's a stickler for detail, a very demanding client. In truth, I've never met anyone as rigidly stiff and unaccommodating as her. What Nora wants, Nora gets. But I seem to be the only one in our company able to make her more pliable. My mother believes emphatically that had I not stayed with the McDougalls all those years ago and been broken in like a wild horse, I would have become exactly like Nora Maxwell, a feisty, very demanding madam that doesn't respond promisingly to the words no by any manner of means. I know my mother's right. I used to be like her in my temperament, so I know how to reach out to her in the way that others do not. There are lots of eateries around here, and I move towards the bright yellow umbrellas, where the cafe is fringed in wrought iron fences and brick pillars. I can see Nora Maxwell sitting under one of the tables, looking as glamorous as ever, her facial muscles stiffened by so much Botox, so much so that she can barely move her face at all. Her skin is sun-kissed by a fake tan, while her lips shimmer with a bright gloss. Her blonde bobbed hair hangs in curtains above her shoulders, while Gucci glasses shade her eyes. She looks every part the affluent Philly housewife. "Oh, Georgina, dear, it's fabulous to see you. You look marvellous in your summer dress, she says, kissing me on both of my cheeks. I hope you've got my kitchen designs there. Will you excuse me for a brief moment while I spend a penny? Feel free to order anything that tickles your fancy. Will do so, I say. The waiter comes over to me. I tell him to bring me a hazelnut latte. I sense someone is staring at me, so I turn around to find myself looking at a young man, very handsome, I might add. He's furrowing his brow as he looks at me, as if something is irking him. There is something strangely familiar about him, but I can't quite place him anywhere. I try to look away, but I just can't. He smiles warmly at me and walks over to my table. He is handsome, tall with blonde hair and ocean blue eyes, that I feel myself melting like butter in his presence. "Hello," he says. "I hope you don't consider me very rude. I assure you this is not a lousy chat-up line, but you do look so familiar. Have we met before? My name is Donovan, and you are?" he says pointedly at me. "You're not Donovan MacDougall, are you?" I ask. "That's the only Donovan I've ever known. You can't possibly be him, can you?" "I am Donovan MacDougall," he says, looking astounded. "And you are?" "Georgina," I say. "I came to stay with your family, Georgina Fletcher, when you were 8 years old. You told me that I was not like sugar and spice like other girls, but like puppy dogs' tails. You said I was the most horrible girl in the entire world, and you hoped you would never ever see me again." "I said that?" he says. "Well, I must confess, I'm going to have to eat my words and apologise for what I said back then. I must have been exceedingly short-sighted. I can see I'm going to have to eat my words. I'm very delighted to meet you, Georgina. My sister told me years after you left our home that she had seen a Bigfoot with you all those years ago. Of course, I didn't believe a word of it, but I swore to myself that if I ever saw you again, it would be the very first thing I would ask you. Is it true?" She's not lying. She's telling you the truth. To cut a long story short, me and Donovan have been married now for 10 years. We have 2 children of our own. So let's just say the world can sometimes be a lot smaller than we think. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.